Hiya, my name's Eve and I'll be your host for today's Youth Voice podcast. Today we'll be discussing domestic abuse, our voice, our power. We'll be joined by two young people and some professionals in this field. So let's jump right into it.
Hi, my name's Anaya. I am part of the Luton Youth Council and I am the campaign leader for domestic abuse awareness.
Hi, my name's Yusuf. I'm also part of the Luton Youth Council and I'm one of two UK Youth Parliament representatives for Luton. And today we have two special guests.
Hi, my name is Nash Hussain. I'm a Detective Inspector with Bedfordshire Police and I'm the Force Victim Tactical Lead.
And hi, I'm Shikal Akhtar. I'm one of the Victim Engagement Officers for the Emerald Team, Bedfordshire Police.
Right, let's pick out one of the questions. In your view, how does domestic abuse affect young people differently than adults?
I think generally, when we talk about mental health, for example, we know that through research, women are affected by domestic abuse, and that includes young women as well as adults. And that causes an increased level of anxiety and depression. So that's across the board. But in my view or my experience, I would say adults have a different environment to young people. Young people might be living at home with their parents or foster carers or guardians, whereas a lot of adults might be in relationships, living with their partners, or they may be living on their own or with their children. So when we're talking about young people, the impact on young people might be that there's more missing episodes because they're not coming home because of the abuse that they're facing and the intimidation. So they will stay out more. They may then, their friendship groups might change. They may be hanging around with people that, might be bad influence on them. Whereas perhaps adults, because they're more resilient, they may not be doing those kind of things. I don't know if you guys have got any friends or people that might have experienced some of that, and we can kind of break that down, how that young person might have had that experience differently to an adult.
I actually know someone that experienced domestic abuse from her stepfather, and it was really it was a really bad environment for her to be in. She was only I would say at the time she was only 11. And the things she went through, she didn't need to go through it. It just happened. And her mum didn't believe her at first. And, it was really hard for her. And I remember she told me she had to record her abuse. But then they used to go through her laptop. So she would hide it in an anime folder and disguise it. And then one day she, her mum saw what was going on and they reported it to the police and she went into a refuge and it's impacted her life so much. She has PTSD, she has severe anxiety. So I think because it happened at such a young age, she missed out on her childhood basically. So she was robbed from her childhood. So I think when a person experiences domestic abuse at such a young age, it takes a huge mental toll on them and it's really hard to recover. No matter how much therapy you get or counselling you get, it's always going to stick with you. The trauma, it scars you and stuff for life. So yeah, when a young person goes through domestic abuse at a young age, I think it's much harder for them to recover rather than an adult because they are more vulnerable. And victim blaming comes into that as well. But it's my mum's husband, I can't, she's obviously going to choose him and not me and stuff like that. And just being scared to report stuff that's happening at home because you don't want to ruin your mum's relationship or something like that. But yeah, victim blaming as well.
Yeah, we've had families where they've reported abuse from the parent, and whether that's physical abuse or sexual abuse, it's a level of abuse that they've experienced from a parent. Now, one of the biggest things, like you say, for young people is they don't want to get their parent into trouble. They don't want to be disowned from the family, so it prevents them from making those reports. But what it doesn't do, like you say, it doesn't help their emotional well-being, because in the long run, there could be a huge impact. So it's really important that we get it right from the beginning and put those interventions in place as early as we can, so we can support their recovery. Because you're right, because, having that trauma in their life will have an impact, and especially on a young person, because they haven't got that emotional ability to perhaps cope with it. So to get that in early is really important, whether that's through counselling, whether that's through domestic abuse programs. The refuges are brilliant because they specialise for families and children who have experienced domestic abuse. So they'll have things in place like play therapy or domestic abuse programs, or they'll have a key worker one-to-one. So we need to get that in as early as possible. So reporting is really important, because it then triggers all the other interventions that need to come in.
What signs should educators, youth workers or peers look out for that might indicate a young person is experiencing abuse?
I think we touched on it a little bit, but just to expand on that, with young people, like I said, if they're in college or if they're at school, there may be more missing episodes at school. If we're looking at like behaviour, they may be, and if we're talking about domestic abuse in particular, if they're coming into school with long sleeves maybe, or, covering their body more. But it could also be the opposite. They may be wearing a bit too much makeup and have a new hairstyle, or their dress sense has changed, because there's that whole control and coercive controlling element as well, which goes hand in hand with all types of abuse. We're looking at whether young people are actually holding friendship groups. Have they distanced themselves from friends because they're spending more and more time with their perpetrator? The perpetrator often isolates the victim from family and friends, so they may not be spending time around that. So, there's a lot of different things, whether that's on a recreational level or education. You could see the signs because of the changes in that person.
Also on a personal level, they might want to not engage with their families a lot. So where you're having family gatherings and stuff, they might not attend the family gatherings. They might be spending more time in their rooms and on their phones, constantly on their phones, because the abuser, if they are going through a coercive or controlling relationship, they might want to check up on them all the time. Or their perpetrator might turn up, or they might be afraid to even leave the house because they feel that the perpetrator might be walking past and they don't want to see their family and friends to see that. They might be subject to like blackmail, especially in relation to naked images and stuff. They might be forced to take images and send them through, and they might feel ashamed or embarrassed about that, so they might not be able to speak to people freely. You will see, I think in domestic abuse, whether it's an adult or a young person, you see that change from what is considered their normal to be completely different. So it's interpreting that behaviour to find what the underlying cause is and whether they are suffering abuse or whether there is something else like mental health issues or other things going on in the background that need to be looked at.
I would say in terms of friends and not just educators or domestic abuse practitioners, because young people tend to hang around with more young people. It's not, there's youth groups and provisions around, but those youth provisions seem to be dying out. So young people tend to hang out and do their own thing. So I think as friends, trust your instincts. If you see a change in your friend, if they're like, on the phone a lot, or whether, like I say, their appearances change, or, trust your instincts. Anxiety, has that increased for no reason? Are they inflexible with their schedules? Because a perpetrator will try and dictate when that person can go out and how much time they can spend with friends, and are they able to come and meet you when you plan? Do they keep cancelling? So keep a lookout for those kind of things, because as friends you would be able to see the difference in your friend.
Also, it's the alertness as well. They're constantly looking over their shoulder. Do they expect suddenly the perpetrator to turn up at any point? And do they see, when they see that person, what is their reaction when they see their partner. Is it a happy reaction or is it a fearful reaction? It's, seeing that reaction, I think, will make you kind of understand whether that's a fearful or happy relationship. And sometimes people can force happiness as well because they've got to show they'll be happy, but otherwise the perpetrator, they know what will happen if they don't show that to the perpetrator. Do they say they have to be somewhere at a certain time? Even if they ask you to, like, can you walk home with me or something, just for that reassurance, because they might fear that the perpetrator is stalking them. Or if their partner turns up and you want to wait with them, but they might say, oh, no, you can't stay. Males with females, for example, if you were the female friend and suddenly the partner turned up, she might ask you to leave immediately straight away, not give you a reason for it, and that may be because the perpetrator might, in that controlling situation, say, well, you can't hang around with male friends, and immediately accuse her of cheating and lying, and there might be a consequence as a result of it. So there are signs out there. It's just they're very, very subtle to start with, and they go through phases, don't they? You've got that cycle.
What role does cultural sensitivity play when supporting young people from diverse backgrounds affected by domestic abuse?
Sometimes I think, so personal experience as well as professional, sometimes young, say Asian girls or boys, they might not want to speak to another Asian practitioner because they feel they may know their family, they may know their circle of friends, so that information is going to be shared out and they don't want anyone to know. Sometimes that happens, but if you present yourself to show that your ethics and your confidentiality is important and you're there to support them, it seems to break down that barrier. But I have seen that happen where they're not comfortable speaking to somebody of the same background or nationality. But like I say, it needs to, you need to address that and show them that because for me as an Asian female, I get Bangladeshi women that perhaps might not want to tell me stuff because they think I'm part of that community. But our job, everything's confidential. We wouldn't discuss that with any other person unless it's a need to know basis for safeguarding. So it's important to build that trust with, people from different cultural backgrounds. And like, say, Muslim women, for example, when I've heard, we're not perfect within policing, but there's so much work being done around that, like the domestic abuse training for new recruits, making sure that we get it right at the start, or new officers get it right at the start, because once you get it wrong, it's hard to recover that. So we try and get that training in right at the beginning. So we're part of that delivery of the training.
We do. So within the training, we recognise not every domestic abuse, but in certain circumstances you've got honour-based abuse as well. So that's where the cultural sensitivities and issues happen. But we try and explain to the officers, look, just because you go into an incident, it's not automatically honour-based abuse. It doesn't trigger a certain response. But it's about asking the questions, being culturally mindful. For example, sometimes females want to talk to females, or they want another person. In Muslim females, sometimes certain religious, if you're really religious, you cannot speak to a non-mahram. So what they may say is they might refuse to talk to a male police officer, for example, without another male present, or they might seem awkward, but they're not seeming awkward. They're not being difficult. It's just that cultural mindset and how how they've been brought up and how they're raised and how they speak to them. So within the honour-based abuse training, we explain all of that, and we ask to ask the questions, be culturally sensitive. Is this what is the norm within that culture, within that family? Because a culture is within a culture, isn't it? There's a family culture as well. It's not just a community culture. So find out what the norm is. How would it affect this person? That's the difference between honour-based abuse and domestic abuse. There is a difference. It's a very fine line, but it's there. But it's listening, communicating, using interpreters and stuff where you need to. We always say to the officers, do not use family members to interpret, because if you don't speak the language, you're not going to know what that person is saying. But equally, if you're then using a child to interpret for the adult, or even their brother or sister, if they can't speak English, imagine the trauma you're placing on that child. Because if they might know half the stuff, and if sexual abuse and other kinds of physical abuse have been then relayed back, then you're really affected that child. So using interpreters where you need to, be culturally mindful when you go into people's houses and stuff. If they ask you to take basic things, if they ask to take shoes off at the front door, take your shoes off at the front door. It's not about being difficult or awkward. If they want a male present, they don't want to speak to you because you're a male, don't say, oh, this is the only thing, we don't do female officers. If there's one available, talk. If not, explain the situation and understand. We're looking at intersectionality. It's not just domestic abuse or other types of abuse. You've got that, again, that layered approach, isn't it? So it's not just one thing. It's, for example, again, I'm Pakistani. I can only speak from a Pakistani background, so I might be Pakistani, Muslim, female. So again, that all affects me. I might be working, or I might be socially, unemployed, or, all that is taken into consideration. We have to act very quickly. We have to react very, very quickly when we're going into people's houses, when that 999 101 call comes in, because we need to make sure people are safe literally from the get-go. But then that doesn't mean that the operational officers, the police officers, leave their learning and understanding behind. They're there to do a job, but they're also there to be mindful about their environment and what people are telling them as well.
I think for victim engagement officers as well, like I said earlier, we don't just support victims who are supporting a police investigation, because sometimes people will withdraw for whatever those reasons are. And the cultural side of things, they don't want to be branded out of the community. They don't want to be looked down on. And sometimes we've had victims in hotels because there's been an emergency accommodation. So we put them in a hotel and then looking for safe places for them to then go on to. But by the time we get to them in the morning, they've changed their minds. So it's about making sure that they're safe when they return home. Because of the cultural issues or the cultural implications for them, they've decided to return home. So we don't ever say to them, well, you can't, but we do say to them, we would like to make sure you're safe. So we give them robust safety plans. We give them numbers for national domestic abuse helplines. So we try and support and look at it from their point of view in terms of what their challenges are as well, and work alongside that to make sure that they are, I suppose, they make those decisions. When they're in a relationship where they've got a perpetrator, the perpetrator often is controlling them. So we don't want to be seen as now they've left that control and they're now in a professional control. So we give those choices for them to make.
And also sometimes the young people might not want their family to know what's going on with them because of the fear of reprisal, repercussion, the shame, dishonour in the community and so on. So you've got to be so mindful when you're going in about that confidentiality aspect. Yeah, there's a young person, they might be of a certain age, for example, but police can speak to young people. We can speak directly to young people and we can take their wishes into consideration. And if you're saying, I don't want my family involved, I don't want them to know about what's going on, then we should be respecting that. Obviously, if there's a certain need for it, we'd discuss that out with you and see how you would want us to approach that. Yeah, it's not just all about professional. We speak as social workers and suddenly we go out and make the decisions. It's about making sure that young person's involved, because only they know they're finding dynamics. We don't know that. An outsider looking in can't make those decisions for them. So it's about engaging and working together to understand, right, this is a situation. Someone says, yeah, I don't want my family involved. I will talk to you, but this is the most appropriate time to talk to me. Or this is when I would prefer to come to the police station, or can you meet me at a certain place? Then we do that, rather than, forcing our way in or doing stuff that would then
put them at risk,
mistrust us and never believe us again, and then prevent them from actually coming forward and talking to us.
Thank you guys for joining the podcast, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. I'm Eve, and if you've been affected by any of the topics in our podcast, there'll be some links in our description. Thank you. Bye-bye.